Hi, it's Dave T here, and over the past couple of years I've been noticing more and more CL sites have been offering barbecues and fire pits and things like that. And yet, strangely, I've yet to see anybody actually use one whilst we've been on site. Which is a shame, because actually at the end of the day, sitting around a fire, perhaps having a drink, relaxing and talking over the events of the holiday so far is a really fantastic thing to do. Especially after the absolute nightmare of a day that I had yesterday. Some of you may know that I actually make films of the CL sites we stay on. Well, we're staying here at Newton Grove CL site, and whilst we're staying here for the first time, I have actually visited here before and filmed the site for John Clifton, the owner, and that's because I got to know him through the Facebook group about off-grid camping. So without a site film to make, I wanted something to do, so I decided to head off to the local town of Burford, which I heard was quite picturesque and I thought might make for an interesting film. Well, I set off for the day, and it wasn't long before disaster struck. Because as I was driving down the country lanes, I drove through a shallow ford without really giving it much thought. But 100 yards or so later, the car started pulling to the left. I pulled over, and when I looked, the front tyre was almost flat. Well, the Land Cruiser does have a proper spare tyre, unlike some cars these days, so I set about changing it, which is when the next disaster of the day struck. As I was trying to remove the old tyre from the car, my hand caught on something, and I cut my hand on a shard of glass that was protruding from the car tyre. When I looked at it, what was odd was the glass didn't look like your normal kind of modern glass that you might see from a beer bottle or something like that, but instead it looked like old glass from an old-fashioned medicine bottle. Well, I wasn't going to be perturbed by this, so I bandaged up my hand, repaired the car tyre and set off again. I was determined to make my film of Burford or be damned. I reached Burford and started filming, and an hour or so later the battery ran out on the camera, which is not unusual. But what is odd is that when I went to change the battery, all 3 of the spare batteries were dead. And I'm absolutely certain that I charged and checked all of them before I set out. Well, I wasn't going to let that stop me, so I had my phone with me, so I thought, right, well, I'll carry on filming for a while with my phone, determined to get some footage of the admittedly very pretty town. An hour or so after that, despite the forecast being good, the clouds set in and I lost all of the light. I decided it was no point in carrying on, so I headed back to the car and started to make my way back home. As I was leaving Burford, there was a diversion sign saying the road was closed, and I got a sinking feeling that the day was just going to get longer and worse. But little did I know that 3 hours later I was still going to be completely, totally and utterly lost. Now don't get me wrong, I do sometimes take a roundabout way of getting places, but I don't normally get lost. But perhaps the first time ever, I was totally lost. I was turning left and right, and then somehow or other getting back to exactly the same place that I'd passed a dozen times before. The sat-nav seemed to be useless, and in the end I pulled up when I saw a sign. I couldn't make out the words on the sign because it was old and covered in moss, so I got out and tried to take a closer look. I was using the light from my phone to try and read it, and with still no joy, I thought, well, I'll take a photo or video of it so maybe I can make out the words. Now, as I was doing this, I sensed or felt, maybe I just heard something, that feeling you get when you feel like you're being watched. So I turned, and across the other side of the junction, I could make out an old man standing in a gap in the hedge. I called out to him, but he just turned and walked through the gap in the hedge. Determined to find my way home and ask for directions, I ran across the road, following the old man, calling out to him all the way. As I stepped through the gap, I ran straight into the thickest brambles ever. There was no real gap in the hedge. It was completely overgrown with brambles and nettles, and the man was nowhere to be seen. Frustrated and starting to feel like I was going ever so slightly mad, I turned around and stepped back into the road to go back to the car, and was almost taken out by a van that came from absolutely nowhere. The sort of souped up van that you see at custom car shows, covered in golden lights, that streaked past me, and if I'd taken just the slightest step further forward, I'm sure I wouldn't be talking to you here now. Well, shaken as you can imagine, I recovered my senses, got back into the car and headed for home. And I don't know how I'd got lost before, but somehow I seemed to manage to just get straight back to the site. It was barely 20 minutes or so and I arrived back. Well, the following day I was talking to John, the owner, mainly trying to find out where I could get a spare for the Land Cruiser to get the tyre repaired. And when I told him of all the troubles I had, and then particularly when I mentioned that I'd almost been run over by this souped up gold light coloured van, he went kind of quiet, like he didn't really want to be there or talk about it. I pressed him on it, and all he told me was to go and look up Burford on Wikipedia. So I did, and here's what I found. Local legend tells of a fiery coach containing the judge and local landowner Sir Lawrence Tanfield of Burford Priory and his wife flying around the town that brings a curse upon all who see it. Ross Andrews speculates that the apparition may have been caused by a local tradition of burning effigies of the unpopular couple that began after their deaths. In real life, Tanfield and his second wife, Elizabeth Evans, are known to have been notoriously harsh to their tenants. The visitations were reportedly ended when local clergymen trapped Lady Tanfield's ghost in a corked glass bottle during an exorcism and cast it into the River Windrush. During droughts, locals would fill the river from buckets to ensure that the bottle did not rise above the surface and free the spirit. And if you think that's strange, then take a look at the photos that I found on my phone when I checked it later on. Thanks for watching.